Nechama Leibowitz. Born in Riga, Latvia in 1905, Nechama Leibowitz grew up in a home rich with Jewish culture and was given a religious education equal to that of her brothers. In 1930, she received her doctorate in biblical translation from a German university, and that same year, she emigrated to Palestine with her husband. Keen, warm, and humorous, Nechama, as she preferred to be called, rejected the new scientific approach to biblical analysis and was regarded as one of the great traditional Torah scholars of the Yishuv, and later of the State of Israel. Famously, in 1942, she began exchanging summer worksheets, little bits of study that engaged all walks of Jewish life, first with her students and then with the general Jewish public. This went on for 30 years, with correspondences running eventually into the thousands. Her writings, including material from these worksheets, can be found in libraries around the world.
So in short, some of the things we learned about her is that she grew up in a household where she was blessed to be able to learn not only Torah topics in a very rich way, the same as other men would be, which already was unique for its time, but she also had a secular education as well. One of the really interesting things about Nechama Leibowitz, and we'll actually learn a little bit more about her from some of her students, was that the way that she approached Torah study, questions that still challenge us to this day, is she would often look to the classical commentaries, as opposed to some of the modern tools, archaeological tools, linguistic tools like studying ancient languages, those scientific methods. And personally, I have been trained in a lot of those more scientific modern methods. So when I go to commentaries, Nechama Leibowitz is not often one of the first ones I go to, having nothing to do with her ability, but she represents a different approach to Torah. But it's very cool that she, a woman, is the master of some of the classical commentaries, which almost exclusively, not even almost exclusively, pretty much was dominated by men. So what I want to do right now is share another source, and welcome to those who just joined. And essentially what Nechama did is she would travel really all around Israel. She would go to different communities and she would teach really anyone. If somebody invited her to their house and said, come join us for Shabbos, so we'll learn, she would do that. She also taught in schools. But when she was done teaching in schools, her students were so in love and enamored by her teaching style, they couldn't send her an email. So they would send her a letter saying, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on this week's parasha, et cetera, like that. And she would send out these sheets. They were typed out, mimeographed, they were copied in that way, and she would send them to her students. And as the video talked about, it went into the tens of thousands of back and forth. She'd send out a sheet, it would have some questions on it. In this week's parasha, Moshe says X, Y, and Z. And then in the next verse, he says this: what's the contradiction? How do we resolve it? How does Rashi help us resolve it? We'll actually see an example tonight. We'll actually learn some of her Torah and try and answer some of her questions. But essentially what happened is she was an exceptional teacher that continued this dialogue with her students, and that turned into essentially these published books. And in fact, Lake Park Synagogue has those volumes that you can just, next time we're in shul, hopefully soon, you can pick them up and read them. But another interesting thing about her is, for Nechama Leibowitz, this funny, outgoing, wonderful, kind person, she was also very humble. And it wasn't about her. So a lot of rabbis, not in an egotistical way, but a lot of rabbis, their commentary are their original thoughts. They bring in other sources, but in the paragraph, it might be 95% the words of this rabbi and 5% quoting other sources. If you look at a lot of Nechama Leibowitz's stuff, it's source from another rabbi, source from another rabbi, source from another rabbi, two-word question, source from another rabbi. It was about her bringing in all these sources and saying, it's not about me, it's about bringing new life to all of these classical sources, because again, she recognized that people were moving away from that. And she felt, and was quite correct, and still correct today, there's still so much wisdom to be gleaned from these classical sources. And we'll see an example, as I said, of that tonight. But the first thing I want to do, and Elizabeth, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, is there's this lovely article from the Times of Israel blog from one of her students, Rabbi Lee Buckman. So apparently he was a student of Nechama Leibowitz. He and his wife studied under her and kept up a long-term a dialogue and correspondence. So I took out a little piece that talks a little bit about not only Nechama Leibowitz as a person, and the way in her pedagogy, the way she taught, but also it gives an example of some of the ways that she actually approached the text. So Elizabeth, if you would take this short piece from this blog written by Rabbi Lee Buckman, please.
Nechama was disciplined in her approach to the text and to teaching. She would begin class with her signature question, Ma kashe l'Rashi?
Which literally means, what is the difficulty? What is the challenge for Rashi? I.e., what did Rashi see? Well, he's going to explain it here beautifully. Go ahead.
She wanted to know what surface irregularity in the biblical text provoked Rashi's comment. We would begin to sweat as we painstakingly attempted to answer her question.
Before you go on, this is what's so important, and it's unique about Nechama Leibowitz, but it wasn't unique for, everyone was doing it for generations, and Nechama kind of brought it back. The way that classical rabbis, Ramban, Ibn Ezra, all of them would study Torah is you'd first basically look at what Rashi said. Not only because Rashi was brilliant, but he often brought in a compilation of midrashim and earlier commentaries. But that's how you approach the text. What do the early rabbis say? And you almost always started with Rashi. When we did our class on Rashi, I don't remember the number, but there are dozens of commentaries that are literally just written to comment on Rashi itself, super commentaries. Whereas in her day, and many rabbis today, they'll approach the text and they'll say, well, I read the text of the Torah. I'm not going to see what the rabbi said. I'm going to compare it to some neo-biblical text, or I'm going to look at some philological, the study of language dictionary, and try and understand what this word is based on archaeological findings. Now, that is not bad. I personally love that way of approaching the text, but people often skip ahead and say, Rashi's old now, and we don't need it anymore, or it's not as important or relevant anymore. And Nechama Leibowitz said, you got to be kidding me. There's so much more to gain from Rashi and those who responded to him. So the fact that this fairly contemporary scholar was still starting with Rashi says a lot about her. And a question that often went in the back of my mind: would Nechama Leibowitz have gained such a following and such a respect in the Orthodox world if she had approached with the more modern academic scientific thing? Or because she loved the classics, Rashi, Ramban, etc., like that, if that gave her more street cred, as it were. I don't know the answer to that, but it's something that is curious to me. Did she build up a reputation by going back to the classics? And of course, being an Orthodox observant person herself. So please continue. We would begin to sweat, meaning the people in her class.
Nechama made it clear that she did not want us to simply paraphrase Rashi's words. She would remind us that Rashi said it well the first time, and it would be chutzpah to think we could do it better. Nechama demanded everything in writing. Otherwise, she feared we might hide behind the raised hand of an eager student who would offer a correct answer.
So again, this is about her style of teaching and her philosophy. Look, Rashi has been studied for thousands of years by the time, or hundreds of years by the time she comes along. So don't think that you think there's nothing new to add to it. There's always something new. And don't just tell me what Rashi said. Explain what was his challenge, what was going on in his head, to make sure you understand it. And don't assume that because there's a smart kid in the class who gets the answer right every time, and we all know that person. Some of you may have been that person, but you could just say, oh, I never would have figured it out, but they did it. No, write down your answer, show your work. What a thorough pedagogue, which can be terrifying, because all of us, I don't know the answer. Oh, thank goodness that person answered it. Nechama says, that's great. Now I want you all to write down your answers and your explanations. So it was challenging, it was terrifying, but it made sure that you understood and internalized the text. So we're not just learning Torah from her, we're also learning how to teach. And that's really powerful that she can speak to us in so many different levels. Please continue. We would struggle.
We would struggle and tremble nervously as this octogenarian shuffled up and down every row of students and approached our desks. No student's answer escaped her scrutiny. She would express horror at our sloppy thinking and offer enthusiastic approval whenever we were on target. At the end of the year, Rachel and I asked her for a set of
Gilionot, that's the name of the sheets that she would send out to everyone.
Gilniot, these single-space typed worksheets on grainy legal-size paper with killer questions on Parashat HaShavua. She distributed them to anyone who asked and responded by hand to anyone who sent her an answer. For 50 years, she marked papers of a vast, unseen, eager audience that spanned the globe. I think we sent her postage money. She took no pay. She was a human worldwide website ahead of her time with a virtual classroom of thousands. When she reached 40,000 responses, she stopped counting. I still have 2 of her hand-corrected responses that she sent on blue tissue paper,
aerograms, which that must be have been an old way to send things perhaps internationally, but I guarantee that either some of you may have these sheets. I'm sure you could find them on eBay, and I'm sure in Israel there are lots of people that still have a folder somewhere of these mimeograph copied sheets. And there's actually an incredible website that has gone painstakingly through every single sheet she's ever done and put them online. And there's another website that is slowly translating them. Now, as I said, well, she certainly wrote her own comments and questions. A lot of her book are her bringing in other sources. Now, she does it in a very clever way and synthesizes them, brings them together. But for Nechama Leibowitz, it wasn't about spoon feeding you the answer. Now, that's not always bad. Some of my favorite rabbis and commentaries are ones that kind of walk you through it and you walk out with a great understanding. But that wasn't her goal. Her goal was to teach you how to learn. Her goal was to challenge you, because if she spoon feeds you the answer, you'll be like, oh, that was nice. That was beautiful. But if she forces you or pushes you to figure it out yourself, you'll actually learn something that will stick with you forever. And what I want to do now is, again, these volumes are at the synagogue, or you can find many of this online. I wanted to bring in a few short examples of what she did. And I found one of her lessons, and it had been translated on the website Sefaria. And I said, oh, that's great. And I copied it and I was reading through it and I said, oh, I read her question. I was like, I'm not sure what the answer is. And I had to spend a lot of time reading it very, very carefully to see what she was trying to get me to do. And I looked back at this piece, Elizabeth, that you read about sweating, and I was like, I have to teach this. I'm the rabbi tomorrow night. I can't figure this out. I think I did eventually, but this Nechama Leibowitz, who's no longer in this world with us, she's been gone for years, she still has that power. She has the power to teach. She has the power to still make you nervous and to still rack your brain. And how incredible is that? You can pick up some commentaries and say, oh, that's lovely, moving on. But Nechama, the ways she put her stuff together still makes you think, still is challenging for today. So I am not going to spoon feed these sources to any of you. I'll certainly help in the end. But we're going to learn Nechama is going to teach us some of her Torah. And the way she organized her sheets is she didn't give you the answer. She didn't give you a big paragraph explaining her methodology. She just threw you right in with the core sources, and then she asked her questions. And that's exactly how we're going to approach it. Nechama Leibowitz, not only to learn about her, but to learn some of her Torah. So Jane, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. And before you actually start with the first source, are there any questions up until now? And again, those who joined late, welcome. It's lovely to have you. Okay. Go ahead, please, and read these first sources. And again, this is, I said, what better way to do this than to look at this week's parasha of Tetzaveh. And one of the main topics that I'll actually talk about this week, I think in my Thursday class and maybe my Dvar Torah as well, is it talks about the different garments, the different clothes that are worn by the Kohanim, by the priests, and their different symbolism. And she explores it, at least in 1967. And the sheet I showed you before, that was the original version of what it looked like. So go ahead from this week's parasha of Tetzaveh, please. Shemot 28.
And thou shalt make sacred garments for Aaron thy brother, for splendor and for beauty.
Excellent. So these bigdei kehuna of kodesh, of this sanctified or sacred, whatever it is, for Aaron your brother. And this is being spoken to Moshe. And then the next verse.
And thou shalt speak unto all that are wise-hearted, whom I have filled with the spirit of wisdom, that they may make Aaron's garments to sanctify him, that he may minister up unto me in the priest's office.
Excellent. So again, the way that she organizes it is she gives you the commentary actually of this 19th century Russian rabbi known as the Malbim, which is a acronym for a much longer Mayor Leibowitz, a much longer a name. She gives you the commentary and then she asks you the question. So we're going to go ahead and Susan, I can go ahead and unmute you. If you could please read this first commentary by the Malbim, and then there's a second one, and then she gives her questions. And then we're going to go back like students in our class sweating and saying, oh, what is the answer? And see if we can see if we can figure out what she noticed. Maybe some of you have already seen something. You're like, wait a minute, that's interesting. But Susan, go ahead, the Malbim.
Okay, and you shall make sacred garments. Behold, the garments that he commanded to make were ostensibly outer garments, such that their makeup is discussed, how the craftsmen are to make them with their work. But they really indicate inner clothes. It just
you see that the priest of God?
Okay, all right, yeah, it went blurry.
Oh, I'm sorry, go
inner
ahead.
clothes that the priests of God should make to clothe their souls with thoughts and traits and proper tendencies, which are the clothes of the soul. And the craftsman did not make these garments, but God commanded Moses that he should make these sacred garments, meaning to teach them how to refine their souls and traits in such a way that they wear majesty and splendor upon their internal souls. And the explanation of, and you shall make sacred garments for glory, is that it is understood by us that every place for the soul of a man is called glory, as in Psalms 30:13, in order that my glory sings, you shall make sacred garments for the glory, meaning the soul to wear.
Excellent. So he's here talking about two kinds of garments. There's actual physical outer garments, and then internal garments that are not actually clothes, but something that is connected to one's soul that somehow brings glory and tiferet, etc., like that. That seems to be the basic surface of what the Malbim is saying. And then she brings in one more quote by the Malbim. And Ken, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you to go ahead and take this second quote by the Malbim, please.
Okay. And you shall speak, however, the outer garments, which hint to the inner garments, make this with craftsmen expert in their craft. Nevertheless, even these craftsmen must be wise-hearted, for I have already clarified in my commentary on Proverbs that the wise-hearted is a very high level. A wise one is one who acts accordingly to the principle of wisdom, yet he still has an inner war with his impulse. But one who is wise-hearted is one whose wisdom is acquired by his soul and fills all the chambers of his soul. And about this it states that I have filled him with the spirit of wisdom. It is an explanation of to the wise-hearted, one who has a spirit of wisdom that fills all of his heart. And there is no place found in his heart that is empty of desire, found in his heart that is empty for desire of evil impulses and thoughts that are counter to wisdom. And it is these wise-hearted ones that shall make Aaron's clothes to sanctify him, as they will understand what these garments hint.
Excellent. So when the Torah, Hashem specifically says these wise-hearted ones, they're ones that don't have a bad thought in their head, that awkward translation there, no empty, there's no place within them where they have any negative thoughts. There's no space for it because everything in them is filled with wisdom. And somehow because of that, all positive thoughts, they know what these clothes are meant to symbolize and what they're meant to inspire. That's already giving a hint at stuff. So now we've seen these two quotes by the Malbim. Yeah, go ahead, Ken, you had a thought?
Yeah, but this sort of implies that the people who are going to make them, as well as the recipients, somehow are going to be already or rise to the level of being perfect, not have any aids at all. But we know that's not, except for the Siddiqim, not possible. So I mean, even Moshe didn't go into the promised land. So it's like, okay, what's going on?
So there's an interesting line there in the middle, and it's kind of hinting at like the language used about Betzalel that actually designed the Mishkan, is that wisdom isn't necessarily self-developed, meaning a human gets up to 95%, and then Hashem fills them with the spirit of wisdom for the last 5%. So a human cannot achieve this, but Hashem can help a really good person get to the next level. And the reason Hashem needed to do that, explains the Malbim, is because for these people to design these inner garments, whatever they are, and that's what Nechama Leibowitz is getting at. What are these inner garments, and what's the significance here? To be able to design those, you need to be basically a tzaddik, perfect, and Hashem needs perfect people to make it. And since no perfect people actually exist, Hashem picks almost perfect people and then inspires and instills with them this, divine spirit to be able to bring them the rest of the way. Again, God filled them with this spirit of wisdom, this ruach chokhmah. So that is an answer to your question, Ken, is no. A person cannot achieve this on their own, but Hashem made these people perfect so they could pull this off. But there's still something a little peculiar going around here in these two comments. So the first one says there's outer physical garments made of wool and not linen. Well, actually in the temple, they could be wool and linen mixed, but to make these physical garments. And then there's these inner ones that clothe the soul. And the only ones who could make that are these wise ones who Hashem has to give them their superpower. So here's the first question. And right now I am inviting Nechama Leibowitz into this space right now. She is walking, this octogenarian is walking up and down at the seats as she asks us this question. And I'm going to go back up to the sources and we're going to see if we can answer this first question. She says in Hebrew, Mahu akushi shebepsukenu, in our verses, de la'ayil, which are above, I'll scroll up to them, Hamusha bedivrei hamalbim, which have been resolved in the words of the Malbim, or in English, what is the difficulty in our verse, the two verses? What does she see in there? What does the Malbim notice in there that the words of the Malbim resolve? So I'm going to scroll up, and again, these two verses that Jane read, the first one, Ve'asita vigdei kodesh le'aharon achicha lechavoli tifaret. And this is Hashem speaking to Moshe. Moshe, you should make the sacred garments for Aharon, your brother, for honor and for glory. And then the very next verse, 28:3, Ve'ata tedaber el kol chachmei lev. And then again, Hashem speaking to Moshe, and you should speak to all of those who are wise of heart, the chachmei lev, asher miletiv ruach, who are filled, or I have filled with this ruach of chokhmah, of wisdom, ve'asu et bigdei Aharon, and they should make the clothing of Aharon, lekodsho, to sanctify him, lechochano li, to be able to serve me. What's the contradiction that the Malbim noticed is in these two verses that you point and say, wait a minute, something doesn't jive there. So I'm gonna again imagine Nechama Leibowitz walking up and down as you both stare intently at your paper, terrified that she'll call on you. I want to imply that. I'm only using the words of Rabbi Buckman above, but what did she notice between these two verses? Again, both of them are said to Moshe. Yeah, Jane, unmuting you. Oh, you just have to unmute on your side.
Who makes the clothes?
Excellent.
Moshe or the wise-hearted people.
Excellent. So Jane, you get, I don't know if Nechama Leibowitz gave out gold stars, but if she did, you would get one right on your paper.
Yeah.
So yes, in the first one, it says in the singular in Hebrew, ve'asita, or in the English, and thou, meaning Moshe, you should make these sacred garments. And then the very next verse, it says to Moshe, talk to these people of wise heart, who I have filled, God has filled with a spirit of wisdom, ve'asu, and they should make the clothing for Aharon. So now that we know the contradiction, in one verse, God says, Moshe make it, and the next verse, it says these people of wisdom make it. How does the Malbim's comment resolve it? That's the next question. And again, remember what the Malbim, he talked about these outer garments and these inner garments that clothe the soul. How does that help resolve the contradiction? Come on, guys, make Nechama proud. Yes, Susan, please.
Well, I'm just trying to, I'm only seeing the top of the paragraph, so I can't actually read the whole thing. It's
Here, I'm scrolling down so you can see the chunk of it. But again,
That's
you don't
in
have to read the whole
Chinese.
thing. It's
It's
takeaway of it.
blurry.
It's
It's
oh, it
blurry.
should
It's
clarify in a second.
It was better before.
Yeah, there we go.
Excellent.
Oh, now it's okay.
One verse says
Yeah,
Moshe make the clothes for Aharon, and then one says these people of wisdom make it for Aharon, and then the Malbim starts talking about two
Moshe
different.
Moshe is going to teach them how to refine their souls, that they prepare them spiritually to do the work.
So that line is part of the answer, but what Malbim is talking about here are two different kinds of clothes. So
Right.
how does the fact that there is an outer garment and inner garment, how does that resolve our contradiction? Is Moshe is making Moshe is making only one there. Oh yeah, Ken, you can finish my sentence and give the answer. Go ahead, Ken.
Here we go. It almost seems as if Moshe should make the craftsmen, refine the craftsmen's inner soul so that they are capable then of making garments that would be suitable for Aaron. So that if the craftsman has got the right, the right intention, kavana in mind when he does that, then the garments will turn out right. But in order to come to that level, that's Moses' responsibility.
Oh, interesting. So
them.
No, that's a really interesting way to look at it. But I read it slightly differently. As if you actually look up earlier, it says, but they really indicate inner clothes that the priest of God should make to clothe their soul. But it says that the garments were not made by the craftsmen. So the way I think that the Malbim is suggesting is there's actually two kinds of garments. The craftsmen are making the outer garments, the physical ones, and Moshe is making those internal ones. There's actually two different kinds of garments here. So it's not that who's making the one kind of clothes, it's either Moshe or the craftsman. There's actually two different kinds. There's physical ones made out of stuff, and then there's these internal ones that only Moshe can do. He's basically training the Kohanim to imagine that they're wearing these kind of internal spiritual ones. But Ken, I don't think your comment is completely off, because the second thing about the Malbim seems to suggest that the actual physical clothes that they're wearing actually do inspire them to raise to a higher level. So Moshe is sitting down with the Kohanim and training them and saying, close your eyes and imagine that your very souls are surrounded by these kinds of garments that bring splendor and glory. They're not physical. They're not made of silk or wool or anything. And then the wise craftsmen are making clothes. And when you put them on, you also feel like you're at a higher level. So the resolution of Malbim is there's actually two kinds of garments. There's physical ones, and then there's spiritual symbolic ones. So there's no contradiction in the verses. What Moshe is making, if we actually look at the verses, we can actually see that it's hinted at when it says Moshe should make these garments for, in Hebrew, lechavod utiferet, for splendor and for beauty. But when it says to these men of wisdom to make them, it says make these big day of Aharon for kodsho and for lechohano, for them to sanctify them and to allow them to serve God. So these garments have totally different purposes. So the ones Moshe make are spiritual clothes, and the one these wise men make are physical clothes that inspire spirituality. And again, all of this happened. All of this, in people, in Nechama's people that she was teaching, all has happened with her making very few words. She asked one question that forces you to dig into the text, that forces you to, my rabbis would always say, break your teeth over it. And in some ways it's, what is it obvious? Should I have been getting that? And it's not obvious. It's supposed to be challenging, but somebody who gets it can appreciate it so much more. But Nechama Leibowitz is not done, because she recognizes that answer, well, gorgeous, maybe there's another answer. And so indeed, she asks another question. She says, now we've scrolled down number 2. Are you able to resolve this difficulty in a different way? By way of Breshit 39:22. So Gloria and Leonard, go ahead and unmute you. And Gloria, if you would take this brief verse from, and this is later, this is later, or sorry, this is actually earlier. This is back in the book of Breshit in the story of Yosef. So go ahead and read this verse and you'll look at it and say, what does this have anything to do with our verses? And someone actually sort of gave the answer earlier, but let's see if we can figure out another way to resolve the contradiction. So Gloria, go ahead.
The chief jailer put in Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in that prison, and he was the one to carry out everything that was done there.
Excellent. So in the Hebrew, the Sar Beit HaSohar, the prince, the main head jailer who's in charge of all the prisons, he put in the hands of Yosef, Kol Asrim. He put Yosef in charge of the prisoners. So how could that resolve our two verses? And Gloria and Leonard, if you figured it out, it's great. If anyone else, raise your hand. How could that resolve our contradiction here? Someone hinted at it. Someone said it earlier. They were trying to figure out when they were trying to understand the Malbim. They understood it slightly differently, but that was actually what this, and again, it's so cool. Nechama Leibowitz is not spoon feeding you the answer. She gives you all the tools you need and then says, go ahead, figure it out. And this one, I think once you hear it, you'll be like, oh, that was a little bit more obvious. But again, somebody suggested this earlier in the way they read the Malbim. Again, the person who was in charge of all the prisons put Yosef in charge of the prisoners. How does that resolve our contradiction where the first one says Moshe makes the clothes, and then it says the people of wisdom make the clothes? Might have been Susan who suggested it.
Could it be that that the guy in charge of the prisons was responsible for the outer keeping the people in prison, but Joseph was supposed to rehabilitate them. He was supposed to work on them.
So I love that answer, but it's funny, you're being influenced by the Malbim's interpretation that resolved our verses by making it outer inner garments. She's saying, forget the Malbim now. If we didn't have the Malbim at all, how else would you resolve these two verses? And it's not a trick question. When you hear it again, you'll say, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Tamar.
Maybe because that Moshe is in charge and he's just delegating the job to the smart people who can do the job.
Excellent.
But they are doing all the clothes.
Bidyuk, at tzodeket. So it's not that Moshe needs to make, or he has the responsibility to make sure that they are made. And the way he does that is by then going over and speaking to the people who will actually make them. So God says, Moshe, you need to make sure that these are made, and here are the people who are going to actually help you make it, just like the head jailer is in charge of making sure the prisoners don't get out and start a riot. And he turns around to Yosef and saying, I trust you to actually do the work of rehabilitating or working with the prisoners. So either Ken or Susan, you had actually read the Malbim that way, which is very clever, but that's what Nechama Leibowitz is suggesting here. But how cool is it that she can still challenge us, that she doesn't, we've all read Torah books where it's just written out in long form and it spoon feeds it, which is not bad. But Nechama Leibowitz to this day is still able to challenge us and teach us. And not only that, what I had said is we don't need to always rely on those scientific linguistic things. An academic could come along and say, oh, these two verses, you're misreading them grammatically, they mean blah, 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 which is not, it's not bad. But she says, look at the classical commentaries. And then she says, look at the Torah itself. Within the Torah itself, it suggests the answer. So when you hear or learn the Torah of someone like Nechama Leibowitz, how brilliant it was and how she's still able to inspire people today. And she devoted her life not just to here's my Torah, but here's an entire history of Torah. And I want to give you the tools to be able to learn it yourself. And that is far more powerful than buying someone a book of Rashi, a book of Al-Shich, and all these different commentaries, which are beautiful and gorgeous. We should learn them all. Nechama said all those classical commentaries, anyone can get them. but to be able to know how to access them, how to understand them, how to use them and develop those tools, that's something that a lot of people lack. And the truth is, that's kind of true today. Many people, including myself at times, it's easy enough to go to Google, to look at a parsha and have someone spoon feed it to you and tell you what the answers are, and then to work backwards. But Nechama said, no, I want to create Torah scholars. I want to create people who know how to learn. And she starts with the first question. Don't just see what Rashi said, try and figure out why Rashi felt he needed to say it. And then you become a student like Rashi, and then you can start writing your own commentaries. So this incredible woman who was a Zionist and a teacher and a friend through her entire life still teaches and still inspires us today. And again, these books are becoming available online. The physical ones in translation are available in Lake Park Synagogue, inside of the synagogue. So please find these books, learn from them, challenge yourself. Torah shouldn't always be easy, because when it's a challenge, you appreciate it more. And amazing, Susan is holding up a copy of it right now. So everybody, Susan just gave you an open invitation to her beautiful house.
Yeah, Rabbi Buckman recommended that I get these books. So
that is, and it makes perfect sense. In his full article, where he talks more about the incredible Nechama Leibowitz, may her memory be for a blessing. And again, she's still so alive today, and the fact that some of her students are still out there is just amazing. And she truly is one of. I'll end this one thought: is there was a scholar, a young rabbinit of Torah, and she said that she grew up in her house learning Nechama Leibowitz, but she never in her entire childhood associated learning Nechama Leibowitz of, oh, we should learn her because I'm a girl and she's a girl. Her father taught her Nechama Leibowitz. Why? Because Nechama Leibowitz is an incredible scholar of Torah and everyone should learn it. And the truth is, when I was first introduced to it, it wasn't because, oh, you should be a feminist. It's because this should be on every rabbi and every Jew's shelf, because this is great stuff. And I think that makes it even better. But I do also think it's important to praise her and to hold her up, because there's not enough women Torah scholars. But her legacy is very much alive and kicking today. So we honor her and we thank her for the Torah that she continues to give us.